Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
Ruby, outside Villa Retina, France, September 1917, day 2. The horse is coming closer to me, and instinctively I reel back slightly, then throw my hands forward. The horse eventually slows and moves her head from side to side. With one quick movement, I throw my leg over her back and ride her until she calms down. Gently I turn her around, bending over her mane, talking softly to her as I ride toward the soldier with the bridle. I have my arms on both sides of the horse, stroking her mane, whispering when the soldier catches up with us. "You definitely know the way around a horse," his voice sure and steady. With the sun still in my eyes, I squint and I look more closely at his Australian Army uniform. "Yep, my grandfather taught me. And by the sound of you, you're a long way from home," he says. I slide off the horse and watch him as he positions the bit in her mouth, held in place by the headstall. He tightens a set of straps over and around her head, affixing the leather straps securely under her chin. I stare at his hands, transfixed. These are familiar hands, hands I remember as a small child, holding me, lifting me onto Betsy, hands that fastened saddles and adjusted leg stirrups, hands that taught me how to soften the leather to make it more subtle, hands that turned the pages of my storybooks before bed. I look straight at him, shielding the sun from my eyes with my arm, my mouth gaping open.
Vicki Bennett is an author, artist and corporate trainer. She is the author of more than 30 books, including The Effective Leader, I Found the Keys, Now Where's the Car? I've Read the Rules, Now How Do I Play the Game? And Signposts for Life. Her most recent book, Dreams Can Come True, is a workbook for parents, grandparents and teachers to assist with development in children. Today I'm talking to Vicki Bennett about her new book, The Letters. Vicki, welcome to the Good Reading Podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, letter writing might be something of a disappearing art, but your story is all about the communicative power of the letter and the secrets they might contain. What does the letter and letter writing mean to you?
The symbol of a letter is quite powerful. The symbol of an email sometimes can be quite powerful, but I grew up going to a boarding school, and letters were my link to home, and I found them a mystery, a joy, and sometimes a disappointment. So they're very symbolic for me.
And it's a really determined act to put aside the time to write a letter. It requires quite a lot of preparation, along with some carefully considered thinking.
Yeah, it does. I love the motion of it, the movement of the words over a page. I enjoy that as a kind of meditation. I find it really regenerative. It brings me back into stillness too, that place where we're not so rushed as we are in the 21st century, that we are not always going for deadlines and outcomes, that we're just doing something for the pure pleasure of it. And that's what a letter feels like for me. And it's so interesting because I still write letters, and I have grandchildren, and on their birthdays and at Christmas time, I write them a long letter. It's a bit hard for them to understand running writing because the little ones aren't taught that at school anymore. So it's interesting for them to keep that intergenerational connection by having to read this letter that grandma's written for their birthday. And I kind of hope they'll keep them so that, they'll have something to remember this time in their life in the future. Yeah.
As I read the letters, I got the sense that this was a very personal project for you.
Indeed, it was. I was very close to my grandfather, who was in the First World War. And not long after he died, I found some of his own letters, which I was very excited about reading, and put aside the afternoon to open the box and dig in. And I found at the bottom some letters written by in a French hand, in a French language, a long time ago, 1917. My French is okay, but I couldn't wait to get them translated to understand what on earth had happened to him in France, that somebody would be writing to him after the war in Australia. And my curiosity was piqued about these letters.
Let's talk about that connection, because just like you, your main character, Ruby Scott, the protagonist of this novel, also has a special connection with her grandfather. What role does he play in Ruby's life?
He plays the role of history, that genetic connection to the past. It was an interesting time in Australia. You know, we talk about times being tough now, but I kind of think that, you know, Australia in the war years, First World War, would have been a very challenging time to live. In the book, Ruby was very close to her grandfather, close to him as a little girl, because he had horses, and he taught her to ride Betsy, and was very influential. And she always wondered, you know, what happened to him during that war. He was very secretive, and very, when he came back, and he was an enigma to the family. And she was really interested in his backstory, but she didn't get much backstory from him.
As we get further into the story, we realise that then, as a young woman, Ruby Scott awakes in very unfamiliar surroundings. Where is she, and how did she get there?
Well, this is where the story turns into speculative historical fiction. And this is where it diverges into allowing time to shift. Allowing her to go back in time was the only way I could get her there. And it's not really about time travel, this book. It's just the means by which Ruby goes back in time and meets her grandfather. And when she does that, she's the same age as his grandfather. And I guess it's a dream to some extent, because I often ask people, if you could go back in time, when would you go back to, and what would you change? And it's a really interesting question. And you know, when I asked that to my own granddaughter recently, who's 10, she said, I'd like to go back to being 8 with my mum, and my mum's 8, and we're walking down the street together, hand in hand. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. And I think that there's a part of everybody who wonders about the past, and we know that there's a huge flurry of interest in our past and where we came from and what we did. And I use that shift in time so that Ruby can experience being on the battlefield in France in 1917, and her grandfather's there as well.
French resistance fighter René comes upon Ruby under these inexplicable circumstances. He's suspicious at first. How do they gain each other's trust?
They just feel a knowing for each other. They feel a sense of understanding each other, because the thing that we forget sometimes is that in 1917, the language, the way we spoke was different, apart from the fact that he was French and she was English. He did speak perfect English, though, because he had relatives in London. So he learned how to speak English as a very young boy in London. So he did speak really good English. But there was a very strong connection between them because of the environment. You know, when there's a lot of pressure, a pressure cooker environment like war going on around you, it's like a fast forward button. You press it and you learn very quickly about the other person. But they were both intrigued by each other, and they were both curious about each other. And that grew into something else as well.
René introduces Ruby to his brother Henri. What does Ruby find in Henri?
She found connections of her grandfather in him because he was at the same time experiencing the same time as the things that her grandfather, who was in the background in the war at the same time. She saw bits of a whole lot of people that she'd known over the years, and she was also really interested in the fact that he was helping others at incredible personal risk to himself. He was quite a charismatic character, and she was drawn to that because he didn't have to do any of this. He didn't even have to, he wasn't even scripted, so he didn't need to, but he was doing something very heroic, and that made him very appealing to Ruby.
Your story has as its foundation a family secret. What was that secret, and how did it make its way into this story in the letters?
When Ruby went back in time and looked for and found Augustine, who wrote the letters, she found out that James, her grandfather, had married Augustine, and they had a child, Lisette. And at the end of the war, she was all prepared to come back to Australia with him, but that wasn't allowed, or else there'd be a mass evacuation, as you could imagine, because our boys, our soldiers, stayed long after the war was finished. There wasn't any transport for them to get back. And General Monash, in his brilliance, told our soldiers, our boys, to stay and help them rebuild, help the French rebuild their villages. So in Villebretonne, James stayed for a period of time. In fact, he was there. I don't think he came back until the end of 1918. So that's a long time to be cooling your heels. Our soldiers did a marvelous repair and reconstruction of a lot of villages around the Somme. It was quite extraordinary. And I've been to Villebretonne many, many times, and they absolutely adore Australians there, and you're welcomed as part of their family. And that's not because of how we helped in the war, and we helped a lot, helping to win the Battle of Villebretonne. That wasn't what it was. It was the fact that we stayed and helped them rebuild that they love us for. And that's something that she connects with Henri as well as with James.
Of course, through her time travel, Ruby has the power to change the future. But does Ruby possess the wisdom and the foresight to use that power for the better?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I had to be very careful, and I remember a conversation with my literary agent, and she said you have to be very careful with time travel. It has to be consistent within the work that you're doing. It doesn't matter how wild it is. It just needs to be consistent, the same things that get them there, get them home, the rules, so to speak. And she has really ethical dilemmas at different times, not telling too much and not telling really anything. Because at one point, Henri really wants to know what date the war ends, because, he's in danger every time he goes out as a resistance fighter. And she won't tell him because she said, I can't do that. I can only tell you my story and how it relates to me. I can't change. I don't know if that's going to change my future and your future if I do that. So no, she didn't reveal a lot about the future.
Did you have to work very hard in the storytelling process on reconciling different perspectives on time, the war, life, love?
It was really interesting because I thought the book was ready for publishing, and I worked with my editor, and we were talking about, well, does that chapter work a little bit better earlier, or does that chapter maybe come in to balance past and present and two different characters? It's really easy to follow them in the book, but that was a lot of work to make it easy to follow them in the book. And eventually I got the whole manuscript, and I put it over my big dining room table. And the editor and I looked at all the different, and we moved a couple of the chapters even toward the end of writing, and it just came into perfection when we did that. We just managed, because the timeline and also what's happening and the backward and forwarding between characters, it's really important that we keep the reader with us in every step of the way.
Now, you're the author of nearly 40 books across several genres, the greater proportion being in non-fiction, covering things like leadership, self-help and personal development, books for children and parents offering insights into change, growth and resilience. However, your fiction ventures into historical fiction, or in the case of the letters, what we might call speculative fiction. What opportunities and challenges does fiction offer you that non-fiction can't?
Fiction, it renews my soul. I love to read fiction, and I love to go to different times. I have a very fertile imagination. I presume everybody does, but I really give myself over to a story, and I just love the way that I can change facts. Like I wrote this, and I'm also writing another story at the moment, which is based on some of my family life. And the power to be able to change a fact, the power to be able to bring a person in that doesn't really come in until later in historical reference, and the power to actually weave them into being able to do something for you is so exciting. And I just can't wait to, sometimes I might be walking along the street, or I might be out in the bush somewhere, and I'll be thinking about all my characters, and I get really excited about. It's kind of like a puzzle, because sometimes you have to solve the puzzle to make the story really come alive. But you need to bring your reader along with you, but not solve all the puzzle, because the reader loves something to do. And everything needs to have a purpose as you lead the readers through the story. And you can't fix up all the ends, because as a reader, we really like to do that ourselves.
Vicki Bennett, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Been a great pleasure for me too. Thank you, Greg.
I've been talking to Vicki Bennett about her latest book, The Letters. It's published by Boolarong Press, and you can find it at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to Good Reading print and online magazine at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.